Luxury. Luxury is the name of a vague something in which society is always viewed with a sense of mingled tolerance and condemnation. We must know what is signified by the term before we know what to think about it. Many and various definitions have been offered by wholly satisfactory. Without denying these definitions, we will try to get a popular conception underlying the word. In the first place, it is clear that people ordinarily consider as luxuries many things in themselves innocent and desirable. Silk, dresses, jewels, pictures, etc. No one but an ascetic will condemn as wrong in themselves. Things that appeal to taste and the finer appreciations, and yet we feel we use such things as often unjustifiable. Second, the popular idea of luxury recognizes a difference in persons. We cannot help condemning in one person that we approve in another. Third, we judge luxury differently at different times. There is a continual transfer of articles from the list of luxuries into the comforts and necessities. This transfer is brought about by conscientious consensus of social judgment and is increasingly acquiesced in by all. So we see that the term luxury does not apply to goods of a certain character, but to certain goods in their relation to time and person. We may define luxury simply as excessive consumption, but what determines whether consumption is excessive or not? The answer to the question is connected with the problem of the distribution of wealth. Two facts are prominent. First, the distribution of wealth is enormously unequal. This needs neither proof nor elaboration. Second, the ability of men to use wealth profitably is enormously unequal also. There is not the remotest probability, but the latter inequality can be ever removed. Men must ever differ not only in the nature of their wants and appreciations, but also in their aggregate amount. Should wealth be equally distributed, remembering that ownership means simply control over goods, let us put this question in a simpler form. Should the wealth of a family be owned or controlled in equal shares by its different members? Before we hastily answer yes, let us ask what this would mean. Can the 2-year-old control his part of the family fortune as well as his father? Can he appreciate or profitably use rare books, pictures, and fine furniture, to say nothing of capital or anything like his numerical portion? Plainly not. How much may he claim? First, he may claim as a full satisfaction of his wants, as in accorded to the rest. Second, he may claim a good an opportunity to develop his wants and accorded to the rest. So much he may be indubitably claimed by the law of the solidarity of the family, which is the epitome and type of the solidarity of society, a law which lies far deeper and broader than all the other laws at the very bottom of the foundation of things. Returning to our larger problem, we ask, how much may a man consume? As much as he can lay hold of? We must again remind the reader that this is the law among swine. As much as every other man, the result would be an immediate and disastrous impoverishment of society. How much then? The only justifiable law is that already enunciated for the family. He may consume in proportion to his power to appreciate and utilize. To consume more is to the limit correspondingly the right of some other man. There is no possible reason why goods should be distributed alike to every man. To do so, we would have to use goods where they satisfied trifling, once or none at all. A use which, as we have said, is not consumption but destruction. But while we use a form of injustice has never been perpetrated, an opposite form is exceedingly common. An equality of consumption is demanded on the basis of a simple justice, but not inequality which exists. To consume disproportionately to one's wants or one's likelihood of development is to destroy or to consume with relatively small returns, and is wrong to society. To excessive consumption, which constitutes luxury, is therefore a consumption in excess of man's fundamental claims, which are in general: first, the right is full satisfaction of wants, as he can be accorded to all; second, the right to a free development of his wants, as can be enjoyed by all. Greater inequalities are admitted than would seem to be the case on the first thought. The wants of a king are very great, and these wants are true, legitimate wants, upon the satisfaction of which depends the welfare of society. The wants of those engaged in the learned professions are greater than the ordinarily understood. The higher scholarly, literary, literary and artistic work often involves large expenditures. Travel is more important for those doing the kind of work, and books are indispensable. What is often thought of an luxurious expenditure is simply an outlay, which is indispensable part of the price society pays for the product. Professors in American universities, for example, frequently are not able to satisfy their wants sufficiently to give society work of the highest sort of which they are capable. The rule given is one which looks at consumption largely from the standpoint of individual enjoyment as a result of consumption. When we view the consumption of an individual as a condition of social service, a certain modification may be necessary. Especially the entire social product is not great enough to allow all development their faculties completely. It is unquestionably in the interest of society that those with the highest capacity should be allowed to attain the fullest development of their powers, provided these powers are used in the service of humanity. A disproportionately large consumption of the individual may be praiseworthy, provided this consumption is for the real development of powers designed to be used for the glory of God and the good of man. When the justifiable consumption will, according to these principles, be exceedingly variable, can anyone of the moment claim that such principles now govern social consumption? Immense sums are squandered in passing caprices, which do not correspond to any really felt want. On the other hand, multitudes of fine natures with keen appreciations of large capacities for development and present enjoyment are left without the means for either. So long as these things exist, so long as a vast amount of the world's wealth is destroyed by vulgar and incompetent consumption, which might impart satisfactions of a high order if consumed otherwise and by others, the moral sense of the world will condemn luxury as a social wrong. And what is the excuse for this abuse? Usually, the simple fact of ownership. It is ours, they say. But for what? Simply because our interests of production require capital to be massed under specialized control? The few who are able to manage capital must be allowed to manage it, and management means control. By the many who have wants, must have the wants satisfied, and the satisfaction means the right of consumption, a right proportion to those wants. There is no more reason why a millionaire should consume all the wealth he controls than there is why a philosopher or an artist should withhold from society the satisfactions afforded by his genius. A successful manufacturer once expressed the opinion that a man had a right to put down silk velvet on a muddy crossing to walk on if he were rich enough to afford it. When a man tramples in the mire the fruit of humanity industry, he tramples with it human rights and humanity, and should expect humanity to avenge the affront. It needs no prophet to foresee the men must learn their own property for good of society, or society will own it for them. The right of private property, like other social institutions, is ever on trial. The obsolete objection is still sometimes urged. The luxury gives employment to labor. Does not philanthropic and productive expenditure do the same? But that is not the question. What comes of the employment? The payment wages only helps men to get more existing goods at the expense of others among whom the goods are divided. It may, help workmen to get goods away from others to give them employment, but the only way to help society is to give workmen useful employment, to aid it and encourage them to produce needful goods. Every employment of labor which encourages the production of luxury is a misdirection of social energy, an encouragement to society to spend its money for that which is not bread, and its labor for which satisfieth not. Excessive consumption is necessarily wasteful consumption, and such is necessarily reprehensible. There can be no kind of doubt as to the teaching of Christianity on this subject. Summary. Luxury is a vague conception differently applied according to the time and person. It is excessive consumption of wealth. Consumption should be proportioned wants and capacity for development. Consumption beyond this is excessive and unjustifiable. Equal distribution of wealth would result in the most unwise consumption of goods. Ownership and the necessary centralization of a capitalistic control are no measure of the right to consume. Luxury cannot enrich a community by giving employment to the labor because it misdirects productivity. Questions. What is luxury? What is a popular idea? How does it vary? What may each man justly claim as a consumer? Why may he not justly consume all he can get? May he justly consume all he can produce? Why? What would be the result of an equal distribution of wealth? Why? What objection can be raised to our present distribution of wealth? Why? Should capital and consumption goods be distributed according to the same rules? Why? Literature, social aspects of Christianity. Harmful consumption. We have been careful to avoid the impression that luxury consists in the use of pernicious goods. It is a common query. Why should I not have this if it does me no harm? This we have tried to answer in the previous chapter. It amounts to the same thing as harm. If an innocent bug, insignificant satisfaction prevents the accomplishment of a greater good, a luxury may be a positive good in itself, a satisfaction which society may well hope to make general, but it is a good which society cannot yet afford because other and greater wants are yet unsatisfied. It is a satisfaction permitted ahead of its time. But we have to consider a kind of consumption which is objectionable, or in an entirely different way. Not because it is excessive or premature, but because it is intrinsically harmful. It would be a violation of all language to call the use of intoxicating liquors a luxury in general, but it is certainly on the whole harmful. As we have said before, these wants are as real economic and as other, and we have no intention of assuming the function of the physiologist or the moralist in enumerating the evils which come from the consumption of certain goods, but in one respect we have a distinct part in the discussion. All production is for the sake of man, and consumption is his final term, but in turn man in the principal factor in production and the consumption of certain goods affects him. The result is necessarily transmitted to the process productive. We have anticipated this principle in speaking the influence of standard of life on the efficiency of labor. Now experience clearly demonstrates that the consumption of certain goods unfits men for efficient production. There is therefore an economically harmful consumption. Whatever may be said for this consumption from other standpoints, the economists must appreciate it. All such consumptions are lessens bodily vigor, blunts the perception, and any way detracts from the delicacy of human organism is of this sort. Of course, no complete enumeration is possible, but certain cases readily suggest themselves. The magnitude of this is harmful consumption, however, is enormous. First in the list, of course, comes intoxicating beverages, especially distilled liquors. According to the government's reports, there were consumed in the United States in the year ending June 30, 1890, of distilled spirits, 87,829,562 gallons of wines, 28,956,981 gallons of malt liquors, 855,792,335 gallons, a total of 972,578,878 gallons. This was an average of 15.53 gallons for every man, woman, and child in the country. The increase in amount is not less striking. In 1875, the amount per inhabitant was only 6.86 gallons. Since 1886, the amount per inhabitant has increased almost exactly 1 gallon per year. The number of men engaged in the business of manufacturing these liquors, not including, of course, those who produce the raw materials, is stated by the same report to be 900,808. Of course, we cannot tell just how much was paid by the consumers for this immense flood of intoxicants, which if poured together would fill a channel 20 feet in depth, 20 feet in width, and 54 and 1/2 miles long. But many estimates have been made, both by those who defend those and who oppose the use of alcoholic liquors. They place the cost at from $700 million to $1 billion. If we deduct that part used in the arts, and for the other purposes besides that of drinking, it is probable that the first estimate, namely $700 million, is not too high a figure to represent the amount of money that is yearly paid for intoxicants which are used as beverages. This is equal to an expenditure of about $11 for every man, woman, and child in our country. And comparing the amounts expended for these liquors with what our people expend for other purposes, there have been many misleading estimates made which, in the long run, can be made of no real service. The cause of temperance, for instance, some persons, in comparing the cost of drinks with the cost of all food consumed in the United States, have placed the former a not extravagant amount of about $900 million, but the cost of food they find to be only $963 million. At this estimate, the cost of liquors would only be $15 per capita, while the cost of food would only be $16 for every man, woman, and child in the United States. There is an important difference overlooked, namely that nearly all of the liquor consumed comes on the market and is there estimated in dollars and cents, while perhaps less than 1/4 of the food consumed is brought under the conditions necessary for a money valuation. It is important to note, if the $700 million now spent for grain in the form of liquors were expended for other food and other farm products to satisfy the rational wants of the thousands of families who are rendered destitute for intemperance, it would purchase at least 7 times as much grain in the form of flour as it does that of liquor, because it is true to regard with liquors as with all luxuries that the amount of raw material used in their production is far less compared with their cost to the consumers than it is any other products that satisfy human wants. Thus we could see that those farmers who think the liquor industry creates a demand for their commodities, and those brewers and distillers who endeavor on this to instill belief, are both deceived and deceivers. How much better it would be if farmers could secure high prices for their grain and other products by ministering to those rational and higher wants which strengthen human nature and enable consumers to produce in turn a greater abundance of wealth, rather than satisfying the demands of base appetites that degrade men and lessen the community's wealth-producing power. It is of course obvious that men spend less for liquors, tobacco, opium, and the like. They will have so much to spend for other things, and other opportunities for employment will not all be lessened. On the contrary, as the other expenditures are more likely to be productive, opportunities for employment will inevitably be multiplied. The indirect cost of intoxicating beverages to a community at large is far more tremendous and possible of estimation than the direct cost, We all have to pay for the support of the armies of policemen, detectives, lawyers, judges, and those whose chief occupation grows from the use of intoxicants for prisons, penitentiaries, insane asylums, almshouses. 50 to 8% of whose occupants are the victims, direct or indirect, or of intemperance. While we all share in the loss of industrial power, that comes from weakened constitutions, dizzy heads, and extravagance. Many books and articles have been written, and many public speeches have been made upon these manifold invisible evils. Those who suffer the most from drink are the working classes, and they are also those who can conceal their excesses and misfortunes. But it is a mistake to suppose that the working men alone furnish the drunkards, or that there are not a great number of earnest temperance men among them. The rich have their social clubs where intoxicants perform their work as heinously as they do in the gutters, but less publicly. Almost the only social men's clubs in the United States without a bar attached are so far the Writer and Observed working men's clubs. These appear to generally devoid of that institution. There are few fashionable clubs houses in the United States where intoxicating beverages are not sold. While intemperance is a monstrous evil, we cannot be too earnestly fought against. We should fail to see that it is at the same time both our effect and our cause. When we look for the worst effects of intemperance, we go to our crowded cities and great industrial centers. But here we find industrial and social conditions which force us to believe that until they are remedied, we can look for lasting growth of temperance or strengthening of character. On one side, immense wealth with its temptations of pride and luxury. On the other, crowded tenements and noxious in summer, always loathsome and repulsive, occupied by those who do not know whether they will find work that day or not. Their condition is often the effect of their former temperance habits, and in turn it drives them and their children into further depths of inebriety. An important reason for a craving for intoxicants, as is shown in one of the foremost of American physiologists, is the lack of sufficient food or sufficient variety of wholesome food, and especially poorly cooked food. These and many other facts with regard to an economic conditions of our day admonish us that thoughtful temperance advocate must embrace in his loss of efforts, both temperance and industrial reforms. Another serious waste of wealth results by the use of tobacco. In 1886, there were 743,000 acres, 743,460 acres of land devoted to the production of this weed, and the quantity of cigars, cigarettes, and cheroots consumed by American people in the year 1880 reached the enormous number of 2,821,776,282. In the year 1892 fiscal year ending June 30, there were put upon the market for consumption 4,601,520,650 cigars and cheroots, and 2,896,407,763 cigarettes, a total of 7,497,933,413. The tobacco was that consumed by chewing and in the form of snuff was in 1880 136,275,835 pounds. And in 1892, the amount put on the market in the United States was 265,522,329 pounds. The indirect loss result from the use of tobacco is not so great, nor are its effects upon the consumer so disastrous as in the case of the consumption of intoxicating drinks, but it is at least doubtful whether the enormous outlay shown by the above figures is compensated by any increased happiness of the people. The opium habit is said to be rapidly growing in America, its effects are even worse than those of alcoholic intemperance, destroying both the mind and body and transforming its victims from productive members of community into a public burden. There are other objects of foolish and harmful consumption which will suggest themselves to any thoughtful person. Summary. Harmful consumption is that which demoralizes the consumer and lessens his economic efficiency. The principal harmful consumption is that of intoxicating beverages and tobacco. The per capita consumption is each increasing in the United States, and comparing the consumption with that of food, it must be remembered that a large part of the latter does not come on the market. The indirect cost to the community is greater than the direct cost. Questions: is luxury harmful consumption? Why? Is all harmful consumption luxury? Why? What is the ultimate destiny of the two? What is the amount of intoxicants sold in the United States of tobacco? The value of each? How does it compare with food consumed? What is the difficulty of the comparison? What is the indirect cost of the pernicious consumption? Literature, the drink question, 10 lectures on alcohol, inebriety, its etiology, pathology, treatment, and jurisprudence. Inebriety, its causes, its results, its remedy. Cyclopedia, temperance and prohibition. An organ of prohibition. The organ of National Women's Christianity Temperance Union. Crisis and analysis of consumption. Crises are attended with a glut in the market, and it is said that they are caused by overproduction. A French economist by Jean-Baptiste Say, however, has developed what is called a theory of the market, which has quite generally been accepted by economists. It is that there is no such thing as overproduction, and never can be, until all wants are satisfied. He says that the remedy for apparent overproduction is more production. Men bring commodities to the market. Why do they desire? Not money, but commodities. Money being a mere medium of exchange. Now we already seen that the consumer is a producer. If there is a deficiency of consumers, it must be because those who would like to consume have not produced economic goods for exchange. Overproduction, so-called, is really underproduction. According to this theory, there's a large measure of truth in this theory. When are the most troubled with a glut in the market? Undoubtedly when least is produced. When is there the most ready sale for commodities? Undoubtedly when everybody is at work, or when most is being produced. There is, however, another side to the question. It is quite possible to produce a larger quantity of some commodities, as potatoes, cotton, cloth, etc. The people need more railways, are more produced than the people need the time. The effect of disproportionate production is that some commodities cannot be exchanged. Those who have produced them do not make their normal purchases. There is a falling off in sales of some other commodities, and among the engaged in producing these other wares, some cease to produce. Demand again falls off, and still others cease to work and are already explained. There is disproportionate production and overproduction of some things, and finally general overproduction owing to underconsumption, due in turn to lack of purchasing power. The invention of money is an important factor. Undoubtedly, commodities are in the end exchanged for commodities, but the intervention of a medium of exchange produces weighty consequences. Commodities are in the first instance exchanged for money, and all liabilities must be met in money. Houses, lands, etc. can only indirectly pay debts, and at times cannot rescue one from bankruptcy. Changes in money supply, especially a contraction of volume of money, will render it impossible for producers to meet their engagements. Productions will begin to diminish, demand will begin to decrease, and the result is apparent general overproduction. Remedies for overpopulation and underconsumption, whichever one choose to call it, are many. Whatever improves industrial society in any respect is a partial remedy. It is especially desirable, however, to bring producer and consumer as near together as possible, because it as often happens the mutually desired products, as a matter of fact, can be exchanged. Obstructions to trade should be reduced to a minimum where they cannot altogether be removed. Analysis of consumption and analysis of the consumption of individuals, families, and societies is most instructive. In analysis of expenditures of a family, called a family budget, Dr. Ernst Engel, the former distinguished head of the Prussian Statistical Bureau, has advanced to the theory that it might be possible, by a careful study of sufficient number of family budgets for a period of years, to construct a sort of social signal service. His idea is that it changes the total expenditure and the expenditures for various items in a sufficient number of typical families could enable us to predict the coming of industrial storms. The theory is not, so far as a writer is aware, ever been fully worked out, but the thought is suggestive. The following tables, copied from the report of the Massachusetts Bureau of Statistics of Labor for 1885, are worthy of careful examination. Engel's Law, Prussia. Percentage of expenditure of family. Items of expenditure: substance, clothing, lodging, firing and lighting, education, public worship, etc., legal protection, care of health, comfort, mental and bodily recreation, total. All to 100. Scale 1 to 100%. The highest being subsistence. The lowest being comfort, mental health and bodily recreation or care of health, and legal protection. Number 1 was subsistence, 2 was clothing, 3 was lodging, firing and lighting was 4, 5 education, public worship, 6 legal protection, 7 care of health, 8 comfort, mental health and bodily recreation. The foregoing table demonstrates the points upon the strength of which Dr. Engel propounds an economic law. The distinct propositions are: first, that the greater income, the smaller the relative percentage of outlay for subsistence; second, that the percentage of outlay of clothing is approximately the same whatever the income; third, the percentage of outlay for lodging, of rent, and for fuel and light is invariably the same whatever the income. In the original table, this item was 1.5. The present chief of the Bureau, Hon. Horace G. Walden, kindly writes to the author that his opinion is should be given above, which makes the total correct, and this preserves the regular progression of item 8 in the 3 columns. Fourth, that his income increases, the amount of percentage of outlay for sundries becomes greater. Massachusetts percentages of expenditures amount 754.